Hi, and welcome to the third episode of The Whole Truth with me, your state representative of the 14th Middlesex District, Simon Cataldo. Today, we are going to have the honor of being joined by Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbits-Nutt. Secretary Tibbits-Nutt's portfolio includes the MBTA, our Massachusetts highways, and everything related to transportation in Massachusetts. What a portfolio to have right now with the challenges that we're experiencing in Massachusetts and the opportunities related to transportation that are before us today. I'm so thrilled to be starting this conversation and to be having this conversation with you so that you get to hear straight from the person right at the top of our transportation work that's happening in Massachusetts. Welcome, Secretary Tibbits-Nutt. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have a statewide job. You're everywhere. You have to be thinking about every corner of Massachusetts, and today you're here in Acton. I really, really appreciate that. You and I have met twice. The first was at a ribbon cutting for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, a very exciting time. And the second time was at an event for the 495 Metro West Partnership, and Acton is part of that region, and you gave a keynote address. During those remarks, you talked a little bit about how you ended up geographically within Massachusetts where you are now, and I was hoping that you would share some of that conversation with the viewers today.
Yes, it was quite a journey, and I think for anyone that's tried to find housing in Massachusetts, it truly is a journey. I live in Devens. I ended up moving there with my wife back in 2020, actually, which is only about 20 minutes from here, so it's really close. Initially, we lived in Cambridge, and we became parents, needed a little bit more space, and so then we started looking at houses. We started looking in 128, we started looking at 495, and every single open house we went to, the place was too small, the location was horrible, and way outside of our price range. It just really was, and we knew that it was not only out of our price range for the asking, but there was going to be a bidding war. And it wasn't worth it for us. And so we just kept moving further and further away from the inner core. At that time, I worked in Waltham, so I wanted to have a commute that wasn't miserable. And we ended up going out to Devens. There was a new neighborhood being put together by Mass Development, and we found a house, and it was wonderful, rural community. I grew up on a farm in Indiana, so it was kind of like going back home, but still being within Massachusetts. And it worked out great for us. Really good school. My daughter loves it. She can ride her bike around. But it was miserable trying to find a house. And it was right before the pandemic. So we were actually very lucky to find a house there. But transportation we knew was going to be a problem just from the beginning, because Route 2 is the way that I get to work every day. And it's tough. And I'm constantly talking about the unpredictability of how long it's going to take me to get to work. The fastest I've ever done it is 45 minutes. The longest it's ever taken is around 2 hours, but usually it's about an hour, hour and a half to get to work each day, which I will say is really good in that I experience congestion. So when we have the public, we have elected officials, coming to us saying, this is horrible. Our residents are suffering. I live through it every single day. And actually our highway administrator, Jonathan Gulliver, also lives close, and he also takes Route 2. So it is one of those things where that has become an incredibly important roadway for me. But like I said, the housing was really, really tough. And we also are a two-income household. And so we were experiencing something that actually a lot of people don't even get to experience because of the cost of these homes. So it really is one of these things where it's a housing crisis. We all know that. And transportation, economic development, and housing are intrinsically linked. And that is really, when we talk about the challenges we have, it is really across multiple secretariats.
I really want to talk more about Route 2, and I think it is great that we have a transportation secretary and a highway administrator that are experiencing the challenges that we're experiencing in this region as intrinsically as part of your lives. But you also mentioned kind of the intersectionality of these challenges. We have, in addition to you, we have a new housing secretary.
Yes.
We have multiple secretariats. And so I was wondering, and all of these issues are linked: workforce development, everything is related, certainly to transportation. So could you kind of draw the viewers in to help them better understand, how do you interact with these other cabinet secretaries, these other departments, and make sure that they understand your objectives in transportation?
So when the administration came in, Governor Haley was really big on whole of government. And that's exactly how this has been set up. The secretariats are constantly talking. I would say Secretary Augustus in housing, Secretary Howe with economic development, those are the two I probably talk to most, but also Secretary Tepper with EEA, because they are in charge of the permitting for a lot of our projects. I talk to at least one of them every single day. We know that we need the other one to actually be successful with the priorities we've laid out in our individual secretariats. And we know when we're talking about bond bills, when we're talking about upcoming legislation, especially with the federal grants, we've been so successful in our grant applications because we're going into it together. And I think with this federal administration, they've been very, very responsive to that, especially Secretary Buttigieg and USDOT, by having more comprehensive applications. If we don't help each other, and if we are not constantly putting together our priorities, I don't think we're actually going to be able to address any of these issues. And that whole of government approach, like I said, is really the way that we've been the most successful, and it's going to be what is going to continue to be needed to actually address any of these crises, because we are all experiencing them across secretariats. But this governor, she pushed for it's a team effort, and she means it. And we really are a team. And it's the only way that we have really approached it from the moment she took office.
I'm glad that you mentioned chasing federal money. I have the honor of serving on the Federal Stimulus Committee in the House. And just last week, on Wednesday, we passed the bill that had been put forward by the governor to make us more competitive by taking advantage of the interest on our rainy day fund, to use that as matching funds in pursuit of federal money. And I think that, and I expect that that will be successful, first of all, and a lot of that pursuit will revolve around transportation initiatives. So I'm excited to see that that go into effect. I want to talk a little bit more about Route 2, the Rotary in particular, but the whole corridor. I have been so impressed by and so grateful for the work that the MassDOT highway team has been doing. I think that it is an incredibly sophisticated degree of analysis. And not only that, but the outreach that they've done to the legislative delegation and the public. So I want to compliment you and your team, first of all, on that, and just tell you that it's so much easier to do my job and makes me more effective when they go about their roles in that way. And so many of the people watching, but perhaps not all, might be aware that MassDOT has done a study on the Route 2 corridor, and has come up with some interesting findings along the way. And I just thought, anything you want to say or share at any kind of level of generality or specificity about Route 2 and your views on the Rotary in particular would be great.
Let's start with the Rotary.
Okay.
The Rotary is a nightmare.
Agreed.
And like I said, I take this twice a day. We all know that it is a nightmare. And I think for people who deal with it every day, how we manage to pull this off and how we manage to not have more accidents, I think speaks to the quality of drivers in Massachusetts. But you can tell the second a truck is in there, the second someone who doesn't take it very often, you notice, you can tell. We want to improve the safety there, and we also want to improve the traffic flow that goes through there. It's not working. We all know that. How we address that, that is what this study is really aimed at. Because there are many different options to do this. All of them are going to be difficult, all of them are going to be expensive, but all of them are also going to create disruption. And that is the thing we want to minimize, but we know we need a much safer roadway, especially around that Rotary. This Route 2 study is going deep. It really, really is, because we know the speeds on Route 2 need to come down. We know that we need people to stop cutting through the neighborhoods. That is another really big focus of this study. We want to keep people out of the neighborhoods, out of the local communities, and keeping them on Route 2. So when we finish this and the suggestions we come up with, they're going to be very aggressive. Very, very aggressive, because we know we don't have a lot of time. I think with having, the Correctional Institute closing there, that gives us a little bit more space to make sure that we have more options on that. That's going to really help. But it really is about making it safer, keeping them out of the neighborhoods. That is the biggest focus.
MCI Concord's closure was big news,
Yes.
for many different reasons, affecting many different departments of the state. How are you going to make sure that your voice is heard in that process, recognizing that this closure affords a very unique opportunity and some additional dexterity as MassDOT goes about these plans?
I think that goes back to the cross-cabinet collaboration, working with Secretary Reedy as they're going through looking at all the correctional institutions, but getting an idea of what his priorities are. What are they looking at? What do they think is still going to be needed there? Because there is a state police barracks there. Also working with Secretary Augustus. Concord's really looking at some really aggressive housing developments. What are they thinking now that that land might be potentially open? For us, we also have a district office right across the street from the correctional institution. So we're also looking at, do we need that? Do we need to expand it? Or is this a place that we might be able to move it to give us more room to make improvements to the roadie, but also really focusing on housing? That is a great opportunity. That is a great location. How do we make sure that we're making the best use of that space?
One of the criticisms that I heard of the overpass in Lincoln was that during the plans, and this is long before your time at your current position, but all in all, big improvement and big safety improvement. However, there did not appear to be a major aspect of those plans that involved making sure that folks could cross that without a vehicle.
Yes.
Which leads me into kind of the general topic of how do we start moving away from reliance on cars in Metro West, in our area? Can you talk a little bit about how that issue comes up in your work and any kind of objectives that you have relating to helping us move away from our reliance on cars? We
have an opportunity with a lot of these projects to correct the mistakes that have been made before. And I think single occupancy vehicles, that is how all of that was built. All of that was structured for that. It wasn't built for pedestrians. It wasn't built for cyclists. And it also wasn't really built for bus rapid transit or any of the other new technologies that we can do on roadways to move people through quicker. That is how we're approaching our projects. It is for every single mode. And it's not for access, just access for every single mode, it's safety. So when we do our roadway designs now, it is looking at how are we going to get pedestrians through here? How are we going to get cyclists? And making sure that we are upgrading the other facilities at the same time. Because we have an opportunity. If we're going to dig these things up, if we are going to shut down traffic in these areas, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are providing the community everything they need now, but also everything they're going to need 5 to 10 years from now. So it is a major, major focus of ours. With the vulnerable user law, we now have more legislation that is also helping us push for that safety. We are going to continue to build those into the project. So when we're looking at what we're doing in Concord around the Rotary, we're going to be able to get those modes through safely.
That's so great to hear. I think this is such an opportunity to increase the connectivity.
Yes.
I grew up in West Concord, which in many respects in the late 80s, 90s was kind of siloed off from the rest of the community culturally. That's less so the case now, but it's not really connected, except you still have to cross Route 2. And now with potential changes to the Rotary, a new use for the prison property, there are all these different opportunities that are quite exciting. So glad, and I know the viewers are going to be so glad to hear that that's where your head is at too. So folks might be watching and thinking, wow, Secretary Tibbits-Nutt is so impressive. What an incredible breadth of knowledge that you have. Can you tell people, because I think folks are often interested, they look at somebody like you as secretary and for the Commonwealth and think, how do you get to this place? Could you share with folks a little bit about your professional background and how you acceded to this position?
So I started off as a housing planner. And so I think for me, that's why housing has always been a really big focus for mine. I started in the Midwest, which people constantly remind me I'm not from here. I've been here 17 years, though, always in public service.
Like I'm blowing it, basically, right? Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah,
I think once I put in another 40 years, maybe I'll be considered.
Your kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She was born in Worcester, so I feel like I've
there you
got
go.
that generation, so she's kind of my street cred.
Yeah.
But I started off as a housing planner and learned very, very quickly the biggest issue we had with housing was transportation. So when I moved to the Boston area, I went to a better city in the MBTA advisory board. That is where I cut my teeth in transportation. I learned everything in transportation by studying the budget, by doing a lot of the research, understanding what the riders needed. That is the only way that I ended up in this position. It's because I knew the details, the very small details. Then started working in the 128 corridor, which anyone that's been there, that is a nightmare. 95 is miserable. And focusing on moving people in high occupancy vehicles, shuttle buses, connecting and partnering with the MBTA, and working with developers, a lot of work with developers to where they were investing in transportation. All of that made me, quite honestly, very well-rounded in the field. Then I went to the board. I served on the Fiscal Management Control Board. I served on the Mass DOT board for almost 7 years. So that gave me kind of that political knowledge, gave me the knowledge of the legislation and how to work directly with an administration. So you kind of put all those together. When I got the call, from Governor Healy, when she said leading up to the election, she was like, I need you to build my transportation policy. Educate me. I took all of that knowledge, all of my transit nerd knowledge, and put it into what I wanted as a roadmap, what I thought would be the absolute best vision, and she bought into it. Then, as doing the Transportation Transition Committee, she continued to buy into it. And so when I got the phone call to serve as undersecretary, I was all over it. I was so excited. This was the last part that I would be able to actually influence policy, priorities, investment strategy, and it is. I bring all of that knowledge to bear in this. And now I talk a lot about rural communities. I grew up on a farm. Rural communities are isolated, and a lot of the times they're very economically disadvantaged. So now I spend a lot of time in Western Mass in our rural communities looking at the investments we can make in our small towns to better connect them, because they are the ones that make it so people like myself, my wife is an educator, that we can afford to live in a rural community, but then still be connected to the services we need.
Yes.
That is the biggest focus. Access and options is what we do. That is the simplest way to say it. People have a right to be connected so they can have the life they want here.
We have managed to talk about all these things. I love hearing what you've had to say so far, and I haven't asked you specifically yet about the commuter rail. I will note that we had a big win in South Acton recently, the resumption of express service.
Yes.
Big deal over here. Two-part question. How does the MBTA in Philip Eng's role relate to your position? And is there anything that you want to share about kind of goals, aspirations for the commuter rail moving forward?
So the MBTA is part of MassDOT, and so Phil and I spend a lot of time working together and making sure that our federal funding strategy, making sure that our full Commonwealth priorities are linked in with the 175 communities the T serves. Commuter rail is complicated. It always has been. You grew up in Concord. You have stations. I have 2 commuter rail stations within walking distance of my house connected by bike paths. I do not use a commuter rail. My family doesn't use the commuter rail. It is insanely expensive. So as we're looking at that next step with the commuter rail procurement, also looking at a zone study to figure out what does that cost need to look like. Because Zone 8, that's $400 a month. That is not reasonable for the majority of people in the Commonwealth. But the way it was built and designed, they just presume wealthy people lived at those outer points. So they're like, absolutely, let's charge them as much as we can, and it'll just help subsidize the system. That's not the case anymore. People are locating around there because those communities are making those investments. Now we need to match that. And I have to say, Phil Ing has done an unbelievable job in understanding the role that light rail and heavy rail really play in connecting the Commonwealth and has been really focused on bringing those costs down. You have $45 million for the low-income fare, which is amazing. I've been fighting for it since 2015, and having a GM who instantly bought into that, that's how we're going to be able to use the assets we have to connect the region, but in a way that is affordable for people. Because I'm telling you, the on-time performance on the commuter rail is unbelievable. It's comfortable. You've got Wi-Fi. Now we just need to price it to where more people can access it.
Well, I love it. I take the commuter rail to the State House. It's fantastic. I get to work on it. It's very expensive, but it is certainly something that I think we're going to be able to take more and more advantage of. Your experiences really show up in the job. So I'm just so delighted that you are in this role. Thank you for your service. Thanks for taking on some of the toughest challenges that we have in Massachusetts. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. As you can tell, I love talking about this. So having the opportunity to come on the show, I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being here. Looking forward to our continued work together. That was the third episode of The Whole Truth with me, your state representative, Simon Cataldo. I want to hear from you about your hopes, your aspirations, the challenges that you're experiencing, or if you just need some help with anything related to state government or a state government agency. So I hope you'll continue to reach out to me and my legislative aide, Kyle Stapleton. My email address is simon.cataldo@mahouse.gov. You've got my phone number at the bottom of the screen. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and just keep in touch because that helps me do a better job at representing you. Have a great day.